I never thought I'd be posting here, but I need advice, or maybe just to scream into the void. My life has officially turned into one of those trashy soap operas I used to mock. I, 34F, found out last week that my husband, Mark, 38M, who supposedly died 7 years ago at a Christmas party, is actually alive. Yep. Alive. Breathing, eating, and apparently enjoying steak dinners at fancy restaurants. Some background: Mark and I had been married for 7 years when the unthinkable happened. He was attending a corporate Christmas party while I stayed home nursing a migraine. That night, I got a call from one of his colleagues, saying there had been an accident, a fire broke out at the venue, and Mark didn't make it. I was devastated. His body was badly burned, so there was no open casket. They gave me his watch as proof, which was oddly clean for something from a fire, but I was too numb to question it. The first year after his death was hell. I was a mess. Grief consumed me, but eventually, I forced myself to move on. Therapy, work, and, yeah, some bad decisions, like sleeping with his best friend once, don't judge me. Life settled into a weird, bittersweet rhythm. I even started dating again a couple of years ago, though nothing serious. But now my world has been turned upside down again. I feel like a fool, and I'm not sure how to handle any of this. It all started last Friday. I was at a new Italian place downtown with my friend Lisa. We were catching up over wine and gossip, laughing about some ridiculous TikTok trend, when I saw him. Mark. At first, I thought I was losing my mind. He was sitting at a corner table, casually eating pasta like he didn't have a care in the world. Same dark hair, same laugh, even that stupid leather jacket he always insisted made him look rugged. My stomach dropped. "Lisa," I whispered, grabbing her arm. "Do you see that guy? Over there, in the corner?" She squinted, then shrugged. "Yeah, why?" "It's Mark." Her wine glass froze midair. "Mark, like Mark your dead husband?" I nodded, my heart pounding so loud I couldn't hear the music in the restaurant anymore. Lisa turned back toward the table, her eyes narrowing like she was trying to solve a puzzle. "Okay, maybe he just looks like him. I mean, there's no way, right? Mark's gone." But I knew. It wasn't just the way he looked. It was how he moved, how he talked to the waitress, even the way he ran his hand through his hair when he laughed. "That's him," I said, my voice shaking. And then he looked up. For one horrifying second, our eyes met. He froze, the color draining from his face like he'd seen a ghost. Which, let's be honest, was rich coming from him. Without thinking, I stood up, knocking over my chair. Lisa tried to grab my arm, whispering, "Wait, don't make a scene." But it was too late. Mark, my supposedly dead husband, grabbed his coat and bolted out the back door like a damn coward. I chased after him, leaving a bewildered Lisa behind. I practically threw myself out the back door of the restaurant, adrenaline pumping through my veins. The alley behind the place was dimly lit and smelled like garbage, but there he was, Mark. Alive. Breathing. Trying to disappear into the shadows. "Mark!" I shouted, my voice echoing off the brick walls. He stopped dead in his tracks, slowly turning around. For a split second, I thought he was going to deny it, like I'd somehow mistaken him for someone else. But no. He looked at me with wide eyes, his face a mix of guilt and panic. "Laura," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I didn't know whether to slap him or hug him, so I did neither. "You're alive," I said, breathless. "You're freaking alive. What the hell is going on?" He ran a hand through his hair, just like he always did when he was stressed, and took a step toward me. "Laura, I can explain." "Oh, you better explain," I cut him off, my voice shaking. 7 years, Mark. 7 years I thought you were dead. Do you have any idea what that did to me? To your family? And you're just out here, eating pasta? His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought he was going to argue with me. But then he sighed. It's not what you think, he said. I laughed, a sharp, bitter sound that didn't even feel like mine. Not what I think. You faked your death, Mark. How do you not think I'd have questions about that? He took another step closer, lowering his voice like he thought someone might overhear. It wasn't a choice, Laura. I didn't want to leave you. Oh, bullshit. I snapped. You didn't want to leave me, but here you are, alive, and you never once thought to let me know. To send me a damn postcard or something. Mark looked like he wanted to crawl into the nearest dumpster. It's complicated, he said. That was it. That was his big explanation. It's complicated. You've got 5 seconds to uncomplicate it, I said, crossing my arms. Or I swear, I will scream so loud that half the city will come running. He hesitated, glancing around like he was checking for witnesses. Fine, he said, his voice low. But not here. I'll explain everything, just, not here. Can we go somewhere private? Are you serious? I shot back. I don't trust you to take me to a second location, Mark. You're supposed to be dead. Mark sighed again, looking as defeated as I'd ever seen him. Laura, please. You have no idea what's been going on. I'll explain everything, but I need you to trust me. Trust him? The man who'd let me grieve his death for 7 years while he was apparently alive and well. I didn't trust him as far as I could throw him. But damn it, I needed answers. Fine, I said. But if you try anything sketchy, I'm calling the cops. Fair enough, he said quietly. We walked out of the alley together, the tension between us so thick you could cut it with a knife. Mark insisted we meet at a nearby park, where he claimed it was safer to talk. Safer for who? I had no idea. The park was mostly empty, just a few people walking dogs or jogging under the streetlights. We sat on a bench, far from anyone else. I folded my arms and glared at him, waiting. Start talking, I said. And it better be good. Mark rubbed his hands together, staring at the ground like it held all the answers. I didn't fake my death because I wanted to leave you, Laura. I was forced to, he began. I snorted. Oh, right. Someone forced you to fake your death. Did you join the witness protection program or something? To my shock, his face darkened. Something like that, he said. My laughter died in my throat. You're kidding, I said, searching his face for any sign he was messing with me. This isn't some ridiculous movie plot, Mark. What's really going on? He looked at me, his expression deadly serious. I got involved with some dangerous people, he said. Back then, before we got married, I made some mistakes. Big ones. I owed money to the wrong people, Laura. They came for me that night at the Christmas party. I stared at him, my brain struggling to catch up. You're telling me you owed money to criminals? I said. And instead of, I don't know, coming to me for help or going to the police, you just decided to pretend you died? It wasn't that simple, he snapped, his voice rising before he caught himself. They would have come after you, Laura. After my family. They gave me a choice, disappear, or they'd make everyone I cared about pay. I froze. As much as I wanted to scream at him, there was a part of me, against all logic, that believed him. So, you chose to leave, I said quietly. To let me think you were dead. And for 7 years, you just stayed gone. He nodded, his face filled with regret. I thought it was the only way to keep you safe. But things changed. They're gone now. The people who controlled me, they're gone. Gone. I asked skeptically. Like, moved to another state gone, or cement shoes at the bottom of a river gone. Mark didn't answer, but the look in his eyes told me everything I needed to know. "Oh my God," I whispered, putting my head in my hands. I felt like I was in a bad crime thriller, and I wanted out. But I also couldn't ignore the sinking feeling in my chest. "Why now?" I asked finally. "Why come back now? Why not stay dead?" Mark hesitated. "Because I saw you," he said. "I wasn't supposed to. It was an accident. But when I did, I knew I couldn't stay away anymore." I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or slap him. "You didn't think maybe an email would have been a better way to handle this?" I said. Mark gave me a sad smile. "You deserve more than an email, Laura." The worst part was, he was right. But I didn't know if I could forgive him. Not yet. Sitting there on that cold park bench, staring at the man I'd grieved for 7 years, I felt my emotions bubbling up like a volcano. The grief, the confusion, the anger, it all hit me at once. "You really think showing up out of nowhere makes this okay?" I snapped. "You let me believe you were dead, Mark. I had to plan your damn funeral. I picked out a headstone. Do you even understand what that did to me?" Mark flinched, like I'd physically hit him. "I know, Laura. I know I hurt you," he said, his voice low. "I thought it was the only way. If I had stayed, you'd be dead too. Don't you dare put this on me." I shouted, standing up. "You didn't even give me a choice. You just disappeared and left me to pick up the pieces." I started pacing, my mind racing through every lie I'd told myself to get through those years. "He would have wanted you to move on, Laura. He loved you too much to put you through more pain. And all the while, he was out there somewhere, eating, sleeping, living his life. What was it like, huh?" I asked bitterly. "Did you miss me? Or were you too busy starting a new life somewhere? A new wife? Maybe some kids?" Mark's head snapped up. "No. Laura, no. There was no one else. I never stopped loving you." I laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "Right. You loved me so much you let me think you burned alive." Mark ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling to keep up. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said. "Hell, I don't even know if I deserve it. But I need you to know that I never wanted to leave you." "Well, congrats," I said, throwing my hands up. "You succeeded. You left, Mark. And guess what? I moved on. I had to. I didn't have a choice." The words hung in the air, heavier than I expected. Mark looked at me, his expression unreadable. "Moved on?" he asked quietly. "Yes, moved on," I said, crossing my arms. "What, did you expect me to sit around in a black veil forever? I've dated. I've had sex. I've tried to build a life without you because you weren't supposed to be here." That seemed to hit him harder than anything else I'd said. His jaw tightened, and for a moment, I saw a flash of something that almost looked like jealousy. "I didn't expect anything," he said finally. I hoped." That word. Hoped. It broke something in me. How dare he hope for anything after what he'd put me through? "Well, hope's a funny thing," I said, my voice trembling. "Because right now, I hope I never see you again." I turned and walked away, leaving Mark sitting on that bench. But as I stormed back to my car, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't over. When I got home that night, I felt like I'd run a marathon through an emotional minefield. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get my keys into the door. Once inside, I collapsed onto the couch, staring blankly at the ceiling. Mark was alive. The man I'd spent 7 years mourning, cursing, and, yes, still loving in some dark, twisted part of me, was alive. And worse? He thought showing up and saying, I had no choice, was enough to fix it. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I ignored it at first, but it kept going. Finally, I grabbed it, expecting some spam or Lisa demanding an update. It was Mark. "Mark, Laura, please. I know you're angry, but I need to explain everything. I owe you the truth." I threw my phone across the couch like it was a grenade. The nerve of him, texting me after that disaster of a conversation. Then came another text. "Mark, if you don't want to hear me out, I'll leave you alone. But you deserve to know what really happened." I wanted to scream. I did deserve answers. I deserved every single detail of why he destroyed my life. But was I ready to hear it? I called Lisa instead. "You're not gonna believe this," I said, pacing my living room. "Try me," she replied. I unloaded everything, the park bench conversation, the excuses, his pathetic attempts to justify 7 years of silence. Lisa was dead silent on the other end until I finished. "Okay, what the actual hell," she said finally. "So, he's saying he was in danger, but now everything's magically fine. Do you believe him?" "I don't know what to believe," I admitted. He sounded serious. And you should have seen his face, it was like he was carrying the weight of the world. "But part of me thinks this is all just some insane lie." "Well, here's the real question," Lisa said. "Even if he's telling the truth, what does that change? Can you forgive him?" Her words hit me like a punch to the gut. Forgiveness. Could I even consider it? And if I couldn't, what was the point of knowing the rest? I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat up with a bottle of wine and a million questions swirling in my head. Around 3 a.m., I caved and sent Mark a text. Fine. Tell me the rest. But don't think for a second this makes us okay." His reply came almost immediately. "Mark, thank you. I'll explain everything tomorrow. Meet me at the pier at noon." I stared at the message, wondering if I was making the biggest mistake of my life. But there was no going back now. The next day, I drove to the pier feeling like I was about to walk into a movie I didn't audition for. The sea air was cold, and the gulls overhead sounded more mocking than usual. Mark was already there, leaning against a railing with that damn leather jacket, looking exactly like he used to, like no time had passed at all. When he saw me, he straightened up, stuffing his hands into his pockets. "Thanks for coming," he said quietly. "Don't thank me," I replied, keeping my distance. "Just talk." He sighed, looking out at the water. "After the fire at the Christmas party, I didn't have much of a choice," he began. "The people I owed money to, the ones I mentioned, they found me that night. They weren't just threatening me, Laura. They had pictures of you, my family, everyone I cared about." I crossed my arms, trying to ignore the chill creeping into my bones. "So you just vanished?" I asked, my voice sharp. "They gave me 2 options," Mark said, his tone dark. "Pay what I owed, which wasn't possible, or disappear. They staged the fire as a cover. That's why there was no open casket. There wasn't even a body, it was all a setup." My stomach twisted. "And you just went along with it? You didn't fight back, didn't tell anyone?" "I couldn't," he said, turning to face me. "If I'd reached out, they would have come after you. And I couldn't risk that." His voice cracked, and for the first time, I saw real pain in his eyes. "For years, I lived under the radar," he continued. "Moving from place to place, working under fake names. Always looking over my shoulder. I couldn't even have a normal conversation without wondering if someone was watching. But now, what? They're just gone. Poof." I asked, skeptical. Mark nodded. "The guy in charge got taken out, by his own people, I think. And the rest of the crew scattered. I've spent the last year confirming it was safe to come back." I stared at him, my mind racing. It was all so absurd, but at the same time, it explained so much. The fire, the watch they gave me as proof, his complete disappearance. Still, I couldn't let go of my anger. You didn't think I deserved to know any of this? I asked, my voice trembling. You let me grieve you. Plan a funeral. Move on with my life, all while you were out there playing ghost. I thought it was the right thing to do, he said softly. The safest thing. And I knew if I contacted you, you'd never let me go. Damn right I wouldn't have. I snapped. Mark flinched but didn't argue. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. The sound of waves crashing filled the silence between us. I didn't want to hurt you, he said finally. But I did. And I'll spend the rest of my life making it up to you if you let me. I laughed bitterly, wiping at the tears I didn't even realize were falling. I don't know if that's possible, Mark, I said. I don't even know who you are anymore. He looked at me, his face filled with something I hadn't seen in years, desperation. Then let me show you, he said. I'll do whatever it takes. I didn't answer. I couldn't. My heart was still too raw, too confused. I turned and walked away, leaving Mark standing there alone by the water. But as I got in my car, a small, infuriating part of me wondered if I wanted to see what he'd do next. For the next few days, I tried to push Mark out of my head. I buried myself in work, spent time with Lisa, and even started rewatching some trashy reality shows just to distract myself. But every time I let my mind wander, his face popped up, haunted, desperate, and maddeningly familiar. Then, on Thursday night, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, I wasn't surprised to see Mark standing there, but that didn't make my annoyance any less intense. You really don't know when to quit, do you? I said, leaning against the doorframe. I wouldn't be here if it wasn't important, he replied, holding up a manila envelope. Oh, great. More secrets. I snarked. Just, hear me out, he said, his voice steady. If you still want me gone after this, I'll go. For good. That caught me off guard. He hadn't promised to leave me alone before. Against my better judgment, I let him in. We sat across from each other at my kitchen table. He slid the envelope toward me, and I hesitated before opening it. Inside were documents, photos, and handwritten notes, all outlining what had happened to him after the fire. I kept records, he said. In case I ever needed to prove what happened. This isn't just for you, it's for me, too. To remind myself I wasn't crazy. The photos were blurry, like they'd been taken in secret. There were images of men I didn't recognize, stacks of money, and cars with tinted windows. The notes detailed meetings, threats, and constant movement. This is insane, I muttered, flipping through the pages. I know, he said. But it's the truth. And I wanted you to have it. Even if you never forgive me, you deserve to know. I closed the envelope, my emotions swirling in a storm of anger, sadness, and reluctant sympathy. Okay, so what now? I asked, looking up at him. Mark hesitated, then leaned forward. Laura, I don't expect you to take me back. Hell, I don't even know if I deserve to be in your life at all. But I'm trying to fix the mess I made. And part of that is making sure you're safe. I rolled my eyes. Safe from who? You said they're gone. I think they are, he said, his expression serious. But I can't be sure. Not completely. If they find out I'm alive, or that I've contacted you. You've got to be kidding me, I interrupted. So what, you came back just to drag me into this mess all over again? Mark ran a hand through his hair, clearly frustrated. No, Laura. I came back because I love you. Because I couldn't stay away anymore. But I'm not going to force you to deal with this if you don't want to. I stared at him, trying to gauge if he was being sincere or if this was just another manipulation. What exactly are you asking me to do? I asked cautiously. He looked at me, his eyes filled with something I hadn't seen in years, hope. I'm asking you to let me protect you, he said. Even if it's from a distance. Let me make this right. The worst part? A tiny part of me wanted to say yes. I stared at Mark, trying to process his words. Protect me? From what? His mess had already ruined my life once. The idea of him swooping back in, claiming he could fix everything, felt like a cruel joke. Protect me how, Mark? By faking your death again? Or are we just going to run off into the sunset like we're starring in some mob movie? He flinched but didn't look away. It's not like that, he said. I'm not asking you to disappear with me. I just need to make sure you're safe, financially, physically, everything. Financially? I asked, narrowing my eyes. What are you even talking about? Mark hesitated for a second, then pulled out another envelope. This one was smaller, stuffed with papers. This is everything I had saved up before I had to go. It's yours. Use it for whatever you need. Move if you have to. Start fresh. I opened the envelope, expecting to see a few $100s at most. My jaw dropped when I saw the figures on the bank statements. Mark, how the hell did you get this much money? Let's just say I've been working some long hours, he replied cryptically. I slammed the envelope onto the table. Don't you dare bring me dirty money, I hissed. I'm not going to jail because you suddenly want to play savior. It's not dirty, he said quickly. It's legitimate. I swear. I wouldn't put you at risk like that. I didn't trust him, not completely, but I couldn't deny the temptation. If the money was clean, and that was a big if, it could change everything for me. But then I thought about what taking it would mean. Mark would still have a hold on me, a tether to my life, and I wasn't sure I wanted that. Why are you really doing this? I asked. What's your angle? He looked at me, his face so open and raw it almost broke me. There's no angle, Laura, he said. I owe you. For everything. And if this is the only way I can give you some of the life I stole from you, then I'm going to do it. I hated how much I wanted to believe him. I need time, I said finally. To think. Mark nodded, his shoulders slumping with relief. Take all the time you need, he said. I'll be around if you have questions. Or if you want to talk. I didn't reply. I just closed the door behind him and leaned against it, clutching the envelope like it was a bomb about to go off. The fallout continues. That night, I called Lisa and told her everything. The truth about the mob, the money, Mark's grand plan to protect me. Girl, you're living in a Lifetime movie, she said. But seriously, are you actually thinking about taking that money? I don't know, I admitted. Part of me wants to tell him to shove it. But part of me. I don't know, Lisa. I've been struggling for so long. This could give me a fresh start. Lisa was quiet for a moment. Look, I get it, she said finally. But if you take that money, you're letting him stay in your life. Is that what you want? I didn't answer because I didn't know. The next morning, I woke up to another text from Mark. Mark, I'm not asking for anything in return, Laura. Just think about it. And if you ever need me, you know where to find me. The worst part? I didn't know if I wanted him gone or if I wanted him to fight harder to stay. The envelope sat on my kitchen counter like it was mocking me. Every time I walked by, I'd glance at it, torn between my desire to open it and my instinct to throw it straight into the trash. Mark's words kept ringing in my ears, it's yours. Use it for whatever you need. Lisa was right. Taking the money meant letting Mark linger in my life, and I wasn't sure I could handle that. But damn, the idea of finally being free from financial stress was tempting. That weekend, I decided to clear my head. I went out with Lisa and a few other friends to a bar downtown. Drinks flowed, the music was loud, and for a while, I forgot about Mark and his stupid envelope. Then, as I was laughing at one of Lisa's terrible dance moves, I felt someone tap my shoulder. I turned, and there he was. Mark. You've got to be kidding me, I muttered under my breath. Lisa immediately stepped between us, hands on her hips. What the hell are you doing here? She snapped. Mark held up his hands like he was surrendering. I'm not here to cause trouble. I needed to see Laura. Lisa turned to me, her eyebrows raised in a silent question. I sighed. It's fine, I said reluctantly. I'll talk to him outside. We stepped into the cool night air, and I crossed my arms, glaring at him. You're stalking me now? I asked. I wasn't stalking you, he said defensively. I just happened to see you were here. Oh, so now you're just conveniently everywhere I go? I shot back. Mark sighed, running a hand through his hair. I'm sorry, he said. I know I'm pushing, but I can't stop thinking about you. About us. There is no us, Mark, I said, my voice firm. You killed that when you faked your death and left me to deal with the fallout. He looked at me, his expression filled with something between regret and desperation. I know I can't undo what I did, he said quietly. But I can't walk away, Laura. Not again. You already did, I snapped. And now you're trying to swoop in and act like you're some kind of hero? It's not that simple. Mark reached out, hesitated, then let his hand drop. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said. But I'm not giving up on you. Not yet. I stared at him, torn between wanting to scream at him and wanting to believe he meant it. Go home, Mark, I said finally. I need time to figure out what the hell I even want. He nodded, his shoulders slumping, and walked away. The spiral. After that encounter, I felt like my life was spiraling. Everywhere I went, I felt like Mark's shadow was following me. Not literally, thank God, but in my head. Memories of our life together kept surfacing, mixing with the anger and confusion I felt now. One night, after too many glasses of wine, I opened the envelope. Inside was a stack of neatly organized cash and bank statements confirming the funds were legitimate. Mark hadn't been lying. I stared at it for a long time, thinking about what Lisa had said. If I took the money, I was letting him stay in my life. But what if it wasn't about him? What if it was about me? Before I could overthink it, I grabbed my phone and sent him a text. Me, I'll take the money. But don't think this means I'm forgiving you. His reply came almost instantly. Mark, thank you. That's all I needed to hear. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I had control over something. But as I stared at the stack of cash, I couldn't shake the feeling that accepting it came with a price I hadn't fully understood yet. Taking the money was supposed to be a step forward, a way to reclaim my independence and start fresh. But almost immediately, I realized it wasn't that simple. The next morning, Mark texted me again. Mark, if you need help with anything, moving, bills, whatever, let me know. I mean it, Laura. I just want to help. I stared at the screen, my stomach twisting. On the surface, his message sounded harmless, even considerate. But I couldn't shake the feeling that accepting his help might pull me deeper into his web. Ignoring the text, I focused on work and made plans to meet Lisa for dinner that evening. I needed a distraction, something to keep me from obsessing over every little thing Mark said or did. An unwanted encounter. As Lisa and I sat in a bustling diner, catching up over greasy burgers and milkshakes, I felt my phone buzz. I glanced at it, expecting some random notification, but my heart sank when I saw Mark's name. Mark, I know you said you need time, but there's something I need to tell you. Can we meet? I groaned, dropping my phone onto the table. Lisa raised an eyebrow. Don't tell me it's him again, she said, taking a sip of her milkshake. Of course, it's him, I muttered. Apparently, disappearing for 7 years wasn't enough. Now he's decided to invade every corner of my life. Lisa rolled her eyes. So, what does he want now? Another heartfelt explanation. Probably, I said. He says there's something he needs to tell me. Lisa leaned forward, her expression serious. Look, Laura, I know this is messy, but if he has something important to say, maybe you should hear him out. At least then you'll know what you're dealing with. I hated that she was right. Reluctantly, I texted Mark back. Me, fine. Tomorrow at noon. The park. His reply came almost instantly. Mark, thank you. You won't regret this. Oh, I was pretty sure I would regret it. The confession. The next day, I found myself back at the park, sitting on the same bench where Mark had first told me his insane story. He showed up right on time, looking more anxious than I'd ever seen him. Thanks for meeting me, he said, sitting down beside me. Let's skip the small talk, I said. What's so important? Mark hesitated, glancing around as if someone might overhear us. I didn't tell you everything before, he admitted. I rolled my eyes. Of course, you didn't. The people I owed money to, they weren't just criminals, he said, his voice low. They were connected. Big time. And when I said they're gone, I mean the people at the top are gone. But some of the lower-level guys are still out there. I froze. Wait, are you saying there's still a chance they might come after you? Or me? Mark nodded grimly. It's not likely, he said quickly. But I can't guarantee it won't happen. That's why I'm trying to keep an eye on you. If anything seems off, I want to know right away. I stared at him, my anger bubbling to the surface. So, let me get this straight, I said. You dragged me into this mess, faked your death to protect me, and now you're saying I might still be in danger. Mark winced. I know how it sounds. It sounds like a disaster, Mark. I snapped. You should have stayed dead if this is what you were bringing back into my life. He looked at me, his expression pained. I'm trying to make this right, he said. I swear, Laura. I'll do whatever it takes to keep you safe. I shook my head, standing up. You've done enough, I said. If you really want to help me, stay the hell out of my life. Mark didn't try to stop me as I walked away, but I could feel his eyes on me the entire time. The uneasy quiet. That night, as I sat alone in my apartment, I couldn't shake the feeling that Mark's confession had changed everything. The idea that I might still be a target sent a chill down my spine. Part of me wanted to call the cops, but what would I even say? Hi, my husband who faked his death for 7 years says I might be in danger because of some shadowy mobsters. Yeah, that would go over well. For now, all I could do was keep my guard up, and hope that Mark's return didn't end up costing me more than I'd already lost. The next few days felt like I was living in a paranoid haze. Every unexpected knock on my door, every car that lingered too long outside my building, sent my heart racing. Mark's confession about lingering threats had planted a seed of fear I couldn't shake. Lisa, of course, was furious when I told her. So now you're living in some mob movie sequel, she said, pacing my living room. Laura, you need to go to the cops. Or, like, disappear for real this time. And tell them what? I shot back. That my not dead husband says I might be in danger. I'd sound insane, Lisa. She threw her hands in the air. Then what's the plan? Just sit here and hope no one comes for you. That was the problem, I didn't have a plan. And as much as I hated to admit it, Mark's offer to keep an eye on me was starting to feel less absurd. The return of Mark. The decision was made for me that evening when Mark showed up unannounced. I opened the door, ready to chew him out, but stopped when I saw his face. He looked haggard, like he hadn't slept in days. "We need to talk," he said, his voice tight. "What now?" I asked, stepping aside reluctantly to let him in. He didn't sit down. Instead, he paced the room, his energy restless and tense. "I've been watching," he said. "Keeping tabs on anyone who might still be connected to the old crew." "What, like a private investigator?" I asked sarcastically. Mark ignored the jab. "I noticed a car parked outside your building the other night. It didn't belong to any of your neighbors. And when I tried to get a better look, they took off." My stomach dropped. "Are you serious?" I asked, my voice shaking. "I'm not saying it's definitely them," he said quickly. "But it's enough to make me worried." I sank onto the couch, my hands trembling. "What am I supposed to do, Mark?" I whispered. "I can't live like this." Mark stopped pacing and knelt in front of me, his expression softening. "You don't have to," he said. "Let me help you. I'll handle this." "And how exactly are you going to do that?" I snapped, my fear quickly morphing into anger. "You're just one guy, Mark. What are you going to do, fight them off single-handedly?" He hesitated, and for a moment, I saw something darker flash across his face. "I'll do whatever it takes," he said quietly. A reluctant alliance. Against my better judgment, I agreed to let Mark help. It wasn't that I trusted him, I didn't. But the idea of facing this alone felt even more terrifying. "Fine," I said. "But let's get one thing straight, this doesn't mean I forgive you. And the second this blows over, you're out of my life for good." Mark nodded. "Deal." The next few days were a blur of heightened paranoia. Mark set up a camera outside my apartment to monitor anyone coming or going. He also insisted on walking me to and from work, which was equal parts annoying and oddly comforting. Lisa, naturally, had opinions. "So now you've got your undead ex playing bodyguard. This is insane, Laura." "What do you want me to do, Lisa?" I shot back. "Pretend nothing's happening. At least this way, I have someone watching my back." She didn't look convinced, but she let it go. The first incident. It wasn't until the following Friday that things took a turn. I was walking home from work, Mark trailing a few steps behind, when I noticed a man leaning against a car across the street. He wasn't doing anything overtly suspicious, but something about him set off alarm bells. I glanced back at Mark, who had also spotted the guy. His expression hardened, and he grabbed my arm, pulling me to the side. "Keep walking," he muttered. "Act normal." "What's going on?" I whispered. "I don't know yet," he said. "Just stay close." We passed the man without incident, but when I glanced over my shoulder, he was watching us. Mark didn't say a word until we were safely inside my building. Then he turned to me, his face grim. "That's one of them," he said. My blood ran cold. "What do we do?" I asked, panic creeping into my voice. Mark's jaw tightened. "I'll handle it," he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. For the first time, I wondered just how far he was willing to go. Standing in that grimy train yard, staring at a bloodied man tied to a chair, I felt like I'd stepped into someone else's life. This wasn't me, this wasn't us. Mark had crossed a line I didn't even know existed, and yet here I was, standing next to him like an accomplice. "What message are you even talking about?" I demanded, my voice trembling. Mark glanced at the man, then back at me. "A warning," he said. "They need to know I'm not afraid to fight back. That coming after you means consequences." The man in the chair groaned, muttering something under his breath. I couldn't hear it, but Mark's expression darkened. "This isn't the way, Mark," I said, stepping closer. "You think this is going to stop them? It's only going to make things worse." Mark turned to me, his face hard. Do you have a better idea, Laura? Because I'm all ears. I stared at him, trying to reconcile the man I once loved with the stranger standing before me. The Mark I married wouldn't have done this. But maybe that Mark had died the night of the fire. Let him go, I said firmly. Mark blinked, clearly not expecting that. What? Let him go, I repeated. We're not criminals, Mark. We're not like them. He hesitated, his jaw tightening. If we let him go, they'll come back, he said. And next time, they won't be watching from a distance. They'll come for you. Then we'll deal with it, I said, my voice shaking but steady. But we're not doing this. Not like this. Mark stared at me for a long moment before finally sighing. Fine, he said, stepping toward the man. The next few minutes felt like a blur. Mark untied him, issuing a warning in a low, menacing voice I didn't recognize. The man stumbled to his feet, casting a wary glance at both of us before disappearing into the shadows. I turned to Mark, my heart pounding. This is it, I said. No more of this vigilante crap. If they come back, we go to the cops. End of story. Mark nodded, but I could tell he didn't mean it. The reckoning. That night, back at my apartment, Mark insisted on staying, just in case. I let him, but only because I was too exhausted to argue. We sat in silence for a long time, the weight of everything hanging between us. I didn't mean for you to get dragged into this, Mark said finally. I laughed bitterly. Dragged into this? Mark, you faked your death and came back into my life with a mob of criminals trailing behind you. What did you think was going to happen? He looked down, his shoulders slumping. I thought I could handle it, he said. I thought I could protect you without pulling you into the mess. Well, you failed, I snapped. And now I'm stuck cleaning up the wreckage of your choices. Mark didn't respond. For a moment, I thought he might leave, but instead, he stood up and walked toward the door. I'll fix this, he said, his hand on the doorknob. I don't know how yet, but I will. And just like that, he was gone. The quiet after the storm. The next morning, I woke up to an eerie calm. Mark hadn't texted or called, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. But that calm was short-lived. As I sat sipping my coffee, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Unknown, we know. My stomach dropped. I stared at the text, my hands trembling. Just 2 words, we know, but they hit me like a punch to the gut. Who were they? What did they know? Were they coming for me, for Mark, or for both of us? I immediately called Mark, my heart pounding in my chest. He didn't pick up. Damn it, Mark, I muttered, dialing again. This time, he answered, his voice low and tense. Laura, what's wrong? I just got a text, I said, my voice shaking. It said, we know. What the hell is going on? There was a pause, and when Mark spoke again, his tone was deadly serious. I need you to stay inside and lock your doors, he said. Don't go anywhere. I'm coming over. Mark. Just do it, Laura, he said, then hung up. The waiting game. I spent the next half hour pacing my apartment, every creak and shadow sending my nerves into overdrive. When Mark finally arrived, he was carrying a duffel bag that looked way too heavy for comfort. What's in the bag? I asked, eyeing it warily. Protection, he said cryptically. I rolled my eyes. Of course. Because that's worked out so well so far. Mark ignored the jab and started setting up in my living room. He placed the duffel bag on the floor, unzipping it to reveal a mix of equipment, phones, wires, even a small handgun. My stomach churned. Are you seriously turning my apartment into a war zone? I asked, crossing my arms. It's just precautionary, he said, not looking up. Precautionary? Mark, this is insane. He finally stopped what he was doing and turned to face me. Do you trust me, Laura? I opened my mouth to answer, then hesitated. Did I trust him? After everything he'd done, everything he'd put me through? The truth was, I didn't know. I don't have a choice, do I? I said finally. Mark nodded, his expression unreadable. Then let me handle this, he said. The reckoning. The text wasn't a bluff. Later that evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, there was a knock at the door. Mark motioned for me to stay back as he approached, one hand resting on the gun he'd pulled from the bag. Who is it? He called out. There was no answer, just another knock. Mark opened the door a crack, keeping his body between me and whoever was outside. We need to talk, a man's voice said. Mark stepped outside, closing the door behind him. I pressed my ear against the wood, straining to hear. She's not involved, Mark said firmly. Doesn't matter, the other man replied. You should have stayed dead, Mark. Now we have to clean up your mess. I couldn't take it anymore. I swung the door open, ignoring Mark's glare. If you're here for me, just say it, I snapped. I'm done hiding. The man looked at me, his expression a mix of amusement and annoyance. Bold, he said. But you're not the problem. He is. He pointed at Mark, who stiffened. Then leave her out of it, Mark said. This ends with me. Fine, the man said. But she's a loose end now. You know how this works. My blood turned cold. Like hell I am, I said, stepping forward. You want to end this? Go ahead. But if you come after me, I'll take all of you down with me. The man raised an eyebrow, clearly unimpressed. You've got guts, he said. I'll give you that. After a tense silence, he finally nodded. Fine. But if I see either of you again, it won't end this cleanly. With that, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the night. The aftermath. When the door closed, I collapsed onto the couch, shaking. What the hell just happened? I asked, looking at Mark. They're letting us go, he said. For now. For now. I repeated, my voice rising. Mark, I can't live like this. Looking over my shoulder every second, wondering when the other shoe will drop. He sat beside me, his expression weary. You don't have to, he said. I'll go. I'll disappear again, for real this time. I stared at him, torn between relief and sadness. Maybe that's for the best, I said quietly. Mark nodded, standing up. I'll make sure you're safe before I go, he said. I promise. And just like that, he was gone. The reflection. In the weeks that followed, I started to rebuild. Slowly, cautiously, but with a renewed sense of purpose. I'd survived the unthinkable, twice. What I learned. Life is messy. People are messy. And sometimes, the only way to move forward is to let go of the things that hold you back, no matter how much you once loved them. Mark had been my world once, but now, he was just a memory. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free.